Good morning, homesteaders, gardeners, and cooks. My name is Jennifer. Welcome to Miles Away Farm. This is the early August garden tour, and it's about 6:15, so a little earlier than I'm normally out here, but I wanted to show you guys the garden in the best light and when it was still cool in the day. So let's see what's going on. This is my raised bed garden, and it is definitely rocking August. So let's walk through and start from the back end. We are almost to the point where we can't get through the bean tunnel. Half of my pathways are blocked with zucchini plants, so it's a bit of a challenge to get around. This is comfrey that I'm standing in, and I need to whack this back again. We use it as a cut and drop mulch. So I'm here in the pepper bed, and you can see pepper and eggplant. You can see I have some beautiful eggplant in here that I need to pick. This is Littlefinger eggplant, and this is the first time I've successfully grown this particular eggplant. And what it tends to do is it grows its fruit in a cluster, and you can see that on this one as well. Our peppers are coming along beautifully, although everything is getting a little bit floppy. This is typical of this time of year. You can see, I mean, there's probably 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So there's 13 peppers on this one plant, and I do have it staked, but they tend to get a little floppy this time of year because there's so much weight on it. This is Carmen, and so this is this beautiful bullhorn style pepper, sweet pepper, and it doesn't get sunburned as easily because it has these flat shoulders. It doesn't have a big wide shoulder the way a bell pepper does, and so they don't tend to get sun scald. They are just delicious, and I'm so excited about these. I've been eating these with hummus for the last couple of days, just almost like an apple, and they're just fantastic. This is, you see this spot right here and this big spot right here. That is generally a sun scald issue, although it could be other things as well. When these get red, I will just cut that part off and chop and freeze those, and so it's not the end of the world. This is bullnose. This is the bullnose pepper from Thomas Jefferson that's grown at Monticello. And so I have 4 of those in there. And then this is our Cubanelle. And again, lots and lots of peppers on here. And I have harvested probably 15 to 20 off of these 4 plants already this year. And I need to get in here and harvest again. They're doing quite well. Really lovely flavored pepper. Just the tiniest touch of warmth. So they do have just a little bit of heat to them, but nothing really noticeable. Again, I chop and freeze them. They are better green, in my opinion, than a typical bell pepper is. I think they're really quite delicious and quite prolific, which is another good reason to grow them. I've had a hard time keeping this shade cloth spread well, and I haven't spent the time to really fix it the way I needed to, and so it hasn't been as successful as it could have been. This is an extra nasturtium that I just tucked into the corner here, and it was kind of sickly when I planted it, and it sat and looked terrible forever and ever and ever, and it's finally, recently, gotten quite happy. And so we have some really lovely nasturtium tucked in there, which is fun. This is mostly zucchini at this point. This bed, it's hard to even tell there's a grazed bed in there. This is my Romanesca zucchini plant that I just love so much, but they are absolutely monstrous. I would imagine there's probably a total of 5 of these in here, and then there's 2 patty pans in there in a 4 by 8 foot bed. And I wanted them to spill out into this area, and they mostly didn't want to do that because I have some asparagus over here, and it was too shady, and so they didn't want to grow in that direction, and so they kind of grew back into the bed, which is not what I was hoping for, but they are here. And I have harvested many zucchini off of them. Oh, I missed a pile. I picked these yesterday and I set them down there and forgot to pick them back up, so I got to get that. But here's a good example of one of the zucchini that this plant produces, and that probably needs, there's another one back in there. You see that back in there. This plant grows like crazy, produces tons and tons of fruit. They're nice and firm. They're not super watery. I prefer the flavor. And that probably needs another 8 hours. I'll probably pick that this evening and it will be perfect size. I could pick it now. The size that you pick them is somewhat arbitrary, but they will go from that size to this size in 8 hours and be too big in 24. So that I'm gonna have to go back through there again. I'm gonna come back around so that we can see this from the other side. So here I am on the other side of the pepper bed, and these are, I'm sure a lot of you recognize these. This is shishito, and I have 2 of these in here, and they are lovely blistered, but I have a hard time keeping up with them because we just don't eat them fast enough. And if you look down in here, that's a cubanelle that is starting to turn. And so they will eventually turn red as they get ripe. So I need to get in there and get a couple of those that are just starting. But here's more of the cubanelle from the other side. Quite lovely and quite prolific. Yeah, I used to be able to walk through here. I can't walk through here anymore, at least not easily. This plant has taken over the planet. On this side, I have beans planted, trellising pole beans. The red ones that you see there on the far side are scarlet runner beans. And for all the blooms, and there have been many, 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 many blooms, I don't have a ton of actual fruit set, and that's just because of heat. It doesn't surprise me, and I mostly planted them for the beauty, and so I'm not that concerned about it. Although you can eat scarlet runner beans as small green beans, as early shell beans where they're still soft, or let them dry and eat them as dried beans. And then on this side, this came from a seed swap, and this is a type of noodle bean, and it's just starting to really come on. And I haven't eaten them yet. I harvested one small batch, and I think we're gonna have it for dinner tonight. I haven't tried them. The texture on these is more spongy, is my understanding, than a typical green bean. And so they really need some high heat in order to be tasty. But I found a nice video on how to prepare them. And so we're gonna try those for dinner tonight. And I clearly need to get in here and pick again because there are many, many beans on here. And I can see I missed one. I should have picked this the other day, and this is probably too big, but you can definitely see, like, there's a reason they call these yard-long beans or noodle beans or asparagus beans. They have a lot of different names, but significant size on that bugger. And as I said, I just picked my first harvest about 2 days ago, so they take a very long time. These were all planted, all these beans were planted at the same time. Here's my crazy bean tunnel, which has been really, really fun. On the other side of the bean tunnel, this is an Italian yellow Romesco style bean that's flat. And this is why I don't grow pole beans, why I prefer bush beans for our climate. This is gonna produce eventually, but it's been in the ground the same amount of time as everything else here. And you can see, like, that's gonna be a flower bud. It hasn't even started flowering yet. So all of this growth, it's completely covered this entire trellis, and I don't have a single bean on it yet. So slow, 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 slow. Not the best choice if you want something quick. This is bush beans. I have 3 different varieties in here, and I've picked quite a few of them, but I still need to get in here and pick some more. I've frozen some. I do like frozen green beans. Oh, and there's my first dragon tongue. I did 2 plantings of beans in here because the first one didn't germinate super well. And so I have Maribel, Provider, and Dragon Tongue. That's the first dragon tongue that's been ready to harvest. Aren't they pretty? They're just so gorgeous. And so lots and lots and lots of beans coming out of here. And bush beans, they tend to be, you pick them once or twice and then they're done. So they are not a super prolific long-term harvest. You can plant them every couple of weeks and get large harvests out of them that way. We don't eat a ton of beans, so we don't need them more than just this is gonna be plenty for us. But this is almost picked out. I'll probably get one more picking out of this. And then on the end here, we have soybeans or edamame. And they are just starting to fill out their pods. They're not quite ready yet. I know from experience that this is the kind of thing that you have to watch pretty closely, because they will go from not quite there to past their prime in a couple of days. And so like this one is almost ready. That needs 1 or 2 more days and it's gonna be ready to pick. But fun. I haven't grown soybeans in a very long time, and there's quite a few of them in there, so that's pretty exciting. A little bit of summer savory that I need to harvest. There's 3 plants in here. They've gotten pretty good sized. Everything's getting a little crammed late in the season, which is not unusual. This is our anise hyssop that is starting to bloom. It's a mint family herbal, and it smells incredible. I have a volunteer just in the aisle here where it's not really getting much water. This is borage, and I leave it here for the bees. You can see the pretty blue flowers on there, and they're edible. I don't find them particularly tasty just because they're kind of fuzzy and not fun in the mouth, but they are really, really wonderful for pollinators, and so I grow a lot of it for that. This is a small little planter that I have down on the end here that I have to hand water. Most of these beds are on a drip system, and I put way too many things in this pot, and I need to trim it up a little bit. So we've got marigolds, have been blooming for at least a month. We've got nasturtium, this funny little guy who got really buried. This is a salvia that I'm not sure is gonna actually bloom this year. Another marigold that has been blooming for at least a month, very pretty. Little squat guy, kind of fun. And then another nasturtium in there. This is toothache plant. I got the seeds from this from Baker Creek, and it will numb your mouth. It's used, bartenders like it. It's kind of similar to Szechuan peppercorns. And then you can also dry them and make a tincture, and it's a good numbing product for toothache. So it's a medicinal as well, really fun. And it took a long time to get going, but man, did it go. I need to get in here and pick all of these flowers so that it keeps producing and dry them. But lots and lots of toothache plant, and I think there's a total of maybe 4 or 5 plants in that whole bed. So lots. Oh, look at this gorgeous, gorgeous squash flower. I mean, come on. Gotta just love that. The bees aren't even up yet. But this is another one of those big Romanesco that is climbing out of this bed, so I can't get through here either. This is my okra. And I have 3 different kinds of okra, 4 different plants in here, and they are just starting to produce. And so this one was blooming yesterday. There's one, this one is kind of gotten buried. I've had to cut this zucchini plant back multiple times in order to try to give this guy enough light. But I think he's gonna make it, and they'll get tall enough that I'm hoping eventually they're gonna be taller than the squash. This is a Rudbeckia. I'll look up the variety and put it on the screen. I don't remember the name off the top of my head. I didn't have great germination on these this year, and so I expected to have a lot more of them than I do, but it's come along and it's quite lovely, and I'm very happy that it was in the spot that it's in, because most of the other flowers that were in this bed are just completely buried and not getting enough sunlight, which I seem to do every year. This yellow guy down here, that is a type of snapdragon, and that one managed to eke out enough light to bloom, which is lovely. This red that you see here, this is still part of that scarlet runner that's trying to climb into the okra. And then here's another okra here, and there's our very first okra pod right there. We've had a pretty good hot spell. It hasn't been as, we had a super hot 100-degree plus days for a little while, and then it's been in the high 90s or the low 90s for the rest of the summer, so it hasn't been quite as miserable as it could have been. We only had 1 week of really hot, bad weather. Herb bed here, again, kind of marrying with the zucchini. but I've got a lot of dill in here, and these are ready to harvest. And so I'm just gonna clip these and throw them in a paper bag and let them dry. And then I'll have lots of dill seed for pickling, which is the real reason I put this in here. I did dry some of the fronds as well, but I primarily wanted the dill seed. This little white flower that you see in here, this is coriander. And I'm also gonna harvest the seed on that. But my primary motivation for coriander is always pollinators. They absolutely love it. I did have one on the end here. You can see the remnants of it right there. And the top part of it just conked out. I was picking leaves off of it very unceremoniously, and I think I disturbed it enough that it died. There is a very big one on the other side there that is spilling off the edge of that. It has tons and tons of seed on it. I've got Thai basil in here and holy basil in here. And I know a lot of people really love holy basil tea. There's an adage in herbalism where if you really respond to something and like it, it's probably a good indication that your body needs it. I don't love holy basil as a tea. It's not my thing. It's okay, but it doesn't get me all excited. So, and then of course, sweet basil in here that I have unfortunately not been very good about pruning, and so is blooming gloriously, which is making a lot of pollinators happy, but definitely not giving me more basil. But I have a lot of basil out in the big garden as well, so I'm not that worried about it. And again, I love it just for the pollinators alone. Buried underneath here is some za'atar and some marjoram, and I really need to get in here and prune all this other stuff back so that that's getting more light, and then do a harvest off of that. It hasn't been a big priority. And then this is all parsley. And I have selectively done some harvesting on this parsley, but not nearly enough. I'm gonna make a batch of, I have a great recipe for a parsley mixed herb pesto that I actually prefer to regular basil pesto. And so I'm gonna do a big harvest on that, make some of that, and make some more chimichurri. And then I forgot to say, on the far end of this bed, underneath this poor zucchini, not so poor zucchini, this is our celery. And if we get in here, you can kind of see what's happening there. And I haven't been harvesting this a lot, but I have harvested some of it for smoothies and things, and I'm gonna do a video on the smoothie that I put this in. So we've got some nice celery, some nice celery along this whole side. I have seen a few squash bugs on this zucchini. Not seeing any right now, but I've seen not only squash bugs, but baby squash bugs. And so I actually expect this plant, can you see this, the eggs right there? Those are squash bug eggs. Yep, there's not only squash bugs, but baby squash bugs hatching out right there. Ugh. I'll get in here with a knife and cut this thing. This plant is super pokey, and so it's very hard to work around unless you've got long sleeves on and long pants. But I'm expecting this plant to succumb to squash bug diseases sometime in the next month. And so that'll end up coming out of there, and it'll give everything a lot more light when it does. And by that point, I'm gonna be so sick of zucchini that I don't care. So that's happening as well. And I knew that was a good possibility. There is no adequate spray for squash bugs. The only real answer is hand picking them, and it's just not something I have a lot of time to do. This is our carrot and herb bed, and I'll put a little video up here of me harvesting a couple of these carrots. These are pretty much ready at this point. They're quite lovely. This has been a very rewarding bed, considering I didn't get any carrots last year, so I'm very happy with that. The nice thing about carrots is they'll hold in the ground for a good long time, and so I'm mostly just letting those sit. And then we have a few beets left. I've harvested quite a few beets out of here, and there's going to be a video on making spicy pickled beets coming soon. But most of the ones that are left are ready. You can see there's a very nice sized one right down in there. I'm not a huge beet eater. I like them, I don't love them. And so it's always a bit of a challenge for me to find things to do with them. I do love them pickled, which is why I did pickled beets. And so I may plant a fall crop of beets, or I may just say that's good enough for now. The herb that I had planted in here, which was the nigella, has kind of conked out entirely. That's what this is that you see there. And there's some seed in there that I could harvest, I'm sure. But it just didn't, it was never happy. It wasn't happy from the beginning. But this is the garbanzo bean. If you've ever wondered what chickpea or garbanzo bean plants look like, this is what they look like. And this one is still happy and has some nice pods on it. This one has conked out, and I have some fungus in my soils here that makes these conk out after a while, and I'm guessing that's probably what's happened to this. So I'm not sure if these are going to be mature enough. Let's see if I can get this opened and show you what's in here. There's usually 1 or 2 seeds per pod. Oh yeah, maybe. It's not bad. There's our little chickpea. And these are a pop bean that you can dry roast and eat as a snack, which is why I'm growing them. But we didn't do too bad. That's actually more mature than I was anticipating. And this is there's only 3 chickpea plants in here. So surprisingly prolific given that. This is our breadseed poppy. And they are, can you guys hear that? I think my door to my chicken coop just opened. I hear a lot of actual happy birds over there. So these are almost ready to harvest. These guys that are still green, you can't hear that shaking, so those aren't ready yet. I did have to kind of fence this a little bit because everything got super floppy, but those are about ready to harvest. And then this is a lemon verbena on the end here that has kind of spilled out into this ground area. A whole bunch more of our borage in here. And again, this is just on the ground. We do have an overhead sprinkler that's along this fence in the back that my husband runs, I don't know, maybe once a week over this whole area. And so this stuff does get a little bit of water, but not a lot. Against the fence there in the back, that's catnip that's grown all up at that fence too. So yeah, prolific, lots of prolific stuff happening here. We've got some Swiss chard that finally doesn't look like complete garbage. I think maybe the leaf miners have finally gotten past this season, and so we're finally getting some growth in here that doesn't look terrible. I do have some holes in the leaves. This could be a lot of things, from slugs to grasshoppers to who knows what. And then I have 5 kale plants in here. This is red Russian kale. This is lacinato kale. And then I have 1 more red Russian kale tucked over here on this side that was just an extra that I didn't sell. I'm probably gonna pull these 2 plants out that are on the end. I've harvested a lot off of them, and you see how we're getting a curled leaf here. If I open this up, I'm not sure I can do this yet one-handed. So that's full of aphids. And this is typical. For whatever reason, we tend to get a lot of aphids on our brassicas in the late spring, early summer here. And I could spray this, but I've harvested a ton of kale. I've still got these bigger plants that don't have nearly as much aphid pressure on them. And then I have 1 more of this Russian kale back in here that's not quite as mature. And so the easiest thing to do would be to just take these out and feed them to the chickens. Not sure if you can see. I wanted to show you the rootstock on these. So you can see down in there, look at the size of the root on that. So this has been in the ground since probably April. You can also see, hopefully, that the drip system is on right now. And this runs, I can't remember if I think it's every day. This runs every day because raised beds tend to dry out much, much faster than a typical in-ground bed. This is the end of my peas. These were sugar snaps. Oh, there's one I missed. There's another one that I missed. And this has been surprisingly prolific. I have not had really good luck with peas for years. I always have problems with them. And my early shell peas that were here died out pretty quickly. But these guys, even in the heat, have just kind of kept going and going. And at this point, I do need to tear the plants out. They're yellow and having a terrible time. But really decent harvest on them this year, way better than normal. So pretty impressed with that. Surprise. You know, you just keep coming back to things and eventually something works. This is my green stalk, and I had to put a fence around it because I discovered that the reason I wasn't getting any ripe strawberries, you can see I've got a nice little cluster here, was because my little dachshund Charlie was eating them all. Little buggers, and probably Bodhi too, but definitely Charlie. And so we had to throw a quick livestock panel around this just to keep him out of there so that he couldn't eat it, because the little bugger. And then I've got nasturtiums in here and some very long-suffering sweet peas that eventually I think are going to bloom, although I've lost, I think, a couple of them to the heat. This gets watered every day, and then I try to fertilize it with a fish fertilizer at least once a week. When you've got potted plants like this where they're draining out the bottom every time you water, you're washing all of your nutrients out of the soil every time you water, and those are not going to be recaptured. And so you really need to fertilize plants that are in pots on a regular basis. All right, oh, and on the end here, I had some space because I had pulled some things out. And so this is a couple of more patty pan, because I knew the ones on the other side were gonna get buried by that big plant. And so you can see some nice patty pans in here. And I've harvested a pretty good handful. This plant is quite a bit younger. Let's see, am I seeing squash bugs in here? This is a different side of the garden, although I had squash in this bed. Some squash in this bed last year that were winter squash. I don't think I've seen any squash bugs on this one yet. Yep, I'm not seeing anything yet. But quite lovely, doing well. And if it conks out, again, we've had a lot of squash, so I'm not terribly sad if it does. I'm trying to figure out for that bean bed back there, what am I gonna put in when I take those beans out for a fall crop. This is a collard, so I do have one collard that's tucked in here as well. And these things just go and go and go and go, and I've had them survive winter, so that's kind of the classic backup plant starvation food, but doing well. I wanted to bring you over to this side of the garden, which is weedy. I often throw things that I'm trimming off over into this area. There's some perennial sweet pea in here. There's a lot of catnip. There's oregano. There's weeds. There's asparagus. There's wormwood. There's some Queen Anne's lace. This is a mess. And what the point of showing you this mess is, I really want to impress on you, and I'll say this again in the big garden that I tour, you do not have to have a Martha Stewart garden to produce food for your family. The idea is you want to pull enough weeds and control enough weeds that they're not competing directly with the plants that you're trying to harvest. Aside from that, it's all gravy. Like if that's all you have time to do, that's okay. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to look neat as a pin. In fact, I've often said I don't completely trust gardeners whose garden looks picture perfect, because maybe they have a little bit too much time on their hands. If you like your garden that way and you have the time to maintain your garden that way, more power to you. That's awesome. And I wish I had that kind of time. But in the heat of the summer, when it's too hot to be outside working during the middle of the day, and you're just trying to get through, it is okay to not pull every single weed. Pull the ones that are right next to the plants. Pull the ones that are on the south side of the plants so that they're not shading out your plants if you're in the northern hemisphere. You don't have to have a perfect garden in order to harvest food for your family.